When I was working part-time, after graduating from college, I didn't have a clear idea or plan for my future and what to do next. I even felt lost and confused. During this uncertain period, I chose to work at a restaurant introduced by my mom's friend. It was a hot pot restaurant in the downtown area, owned by a friend of my mom's. On my first day of work, the restaurant was undergoing renovations, and I just found out that it used to be a stir-fry restaurant. I heard it did pretty well, but for some reason, the stir-fry restaurant's owner suddenly went crazy, so the stir-fry restaurant closed down after just a few months. This news surprised and puzzled me. I didn't know the details of what happened, just found it odd. What could have caused someone to suddenly go crazy like that? And as we were busy setting things up, the neighbors and busybodies were gossiping too. The sudden closure of the previously normal stir-fry restaurant left everyone puzzled about the owner's situation. It felt like everyone was trying to find answers, but we weren't directly involved and didn't know the specifics, so these discussions were just pure speculation and couldn't represent the real situation. At this restaurant, I learned to prepare delicious hot pot. From handling ingredients, plating, to keeping things clean. These seemingly simple tasks were a practice of skill for me at the time. As time passed, our business got better and better, and later, the owner gave me a set of keys, mainly so I could arrive at the restaurant earlier to prepare ingredients and set up tables and chairs, wipe tables. I gradually became familiar with these tasks, and the owner began to trust me, assigning more tasks for me to handle. Every night when we closed, she would help me tidy up first, and once it was almost done, she would go to settle the bills. After closing the cash register, she would go home, leaving the rest to me to finish up. Basically, it meant putting away washed dishes neatly, cleaning the restroom, and sweeping the floor. This became my routine before leaving work every day. But on one evening, a strange sight shattered the usual tranquility. That night, because it was a holiday, the restaurant was relatively busy compared to usual, so we closed a bit later than usual. By the time we finished cleaning up, the owner had already left. I continued with the final cleanup, and halfway through, I suddenly felt intense stomach pains. So I rushed to the restroom and sat on the toilet, because the restroom was enclosed, without windows, it was stuffy inside. So I left the restroom door wide open. It was already around 10 p.m., the once bustling street gradually quieted down, the crowd dispersed as the night grew late, leaving only faint noise and the sound of the restroom fan echoing in the air. Suddenly, I heard strange noises, slowly approaching my direction. At that moment, I held my breath, time seemed to stand still, everything fell into silence, only faint rustling sounds could be heard. I didn't know or wasn't sure what the noise was, but it sounded like someone walking on dry leaves. Then, everything happened too suddenly. I was frozen with fear, as if frozen in place. I sat bare-bottomed on the toilet, staring as the owner passed by the restroom door, watching her back as she walked past. Panicked, I quickly closed the door, then hurriedly finished cleaning up and opened the door to leave. But when I stepped out, I was stunned. Because I had closed the metal shutter when the owner left earlier, from just now until now, I didn't hear the metal shutter open at all, so there was no one outside when I stepped out. The figure from just now had disappeared into thin air. At that moment, I was scared to death, didn't even want to stay for a moment longer, just opened the metal shutter enough for me to pass through and rushed out, then panicked and called the owner, asked her a stupid question. "Boss, were you inside the restaurant just now?" Confused, she asked me, "When?" "I've been home since I left work." I suddenly didn't know what to say to her, because if the metal shutter didn't open, how did the owner get in? So I just told her, Sorry, my mistake." The owner continued to ask, "What happened?" Because my thoughts were a bit confused at the time, and I didn't dare to go back inside the restaurant, I just told the owner that I still had some work to finish, and I would come in earlier tomorrow to handle it. We'll talk about the rest when we meet tomorrow, and then I went home. The next day, when the owner came, I explained to her what happened yesterday. She listened seriously and replied, "Could it have been because of the lighting or shadows?" But I was very sure, what I saw at the time was a very real figure. I clearly saw her back and her walking posture. At that moment, the scene replayed in my mind. Suddenly realized, that figure walked past with disheveled hair, while the owner had a short hairstyle, so it definitely wasn't the owner. I told the owner. The figure I saw had longer hair than you. The owner frowned and froze, eyes revealing a hint of fear and shock, and an undisguised panic and unease, as if holding an unknown secret. Finally, she composed herself and said to me, "It's okay, I'll handle it." The next day, a middle-aged man came to the restaurant. He walked around inside seemingly observing something, muttering quietly as if in conversation with someone. I was busy with something at the time, so I didn't know what they were talking about. In the end, the man walked to the door and continued to talk to the owner. Later, I learned from the owner that the man was a friend she had asked to come to the restaurant to check on things. The owner assured me to relax, saying everything had been taken care of. But I still felt puzzled and uneasy, because I couldn't shake the feeling that there might be something wrong with this restaurant. Or something had happened before. Although I didn't fully understand the whole situation, I chose to temporarily trust the owner and focus on my work without dwelling on these things. One afternoon, around 1 or 2 o'clock, when there weren't many dine-in customers and only 3 tables were open, I suddenly saw a middle-aged woman standing outside the restaurant, walking back and forth and constantly peering inside. I found it strange since there were still many seats available inside. What was she looking at? And why did she seem so nervous and afraid standing outside our restaurant door? Later, I noticed her expression started to become panicked. I can't describe it. It felt like she was looking for someone, or afraid of someone inside the restaurant. But I just assumed she was a potential customer, just unsure if there were seats available. So I quickly went out to greet her and asked if she wanted to dine in. She didn't even look at me and continued peering inside. Then she said, "Hurry, get out of here. She's about to show up." I wasn't sure what she was up to, so I asked her again, "Hello, are you here to dine in?" And she still stared inside nervously and said, "Hurry, get out. Quickly leave this place." That's when I realized she wasn't here to dine in, and I didn't know what to do, so I just told her, "If you need to dine in, you can come in to order. There are plenty of seats inside." Before I could finish, she silently turned and left. At that moment, the neighbor called me over. I lowered my head and listened as the neighbor said, "Do you know who she is?" I shook my head and continued to listen as she said, "She's the owner of the stir-fry restaurant. Originally, everything was fine with her, but later on, she went crazy." Listening to the neighbor's words shocked me. So the middle-aged woman I just saw was the owner of the stir-fry restaurant who suddenly went crazy, and according to the neighbor, the owner had been perfectly fine before. No one knew what happened to her. What did she encounter? After returning home that day, the neighbor's words kept replaying in my mind, and my curiosity gradually grew, prompting me to decide that the next time I saw the owner of the stir-fry restaurant, I would ask her carefully. However, days passed, and I never got the chance to see her again. I never had the opportunity to ask. Until one day, I was once again standing at the door, hoping to see the owner of the stir-fry restaurant arrive, but the neighbor called me over. She seemed unable to contain her inner desires, and she told me about the incidents that happened at this restaurant. She said this restaurant used to be a buffet restaurant a few years ago. Then one morning, there were ambulances and police cars parked outside. People were coming in and out. No one knew what had happened, and finally, the owner of the buffet restaurant was wheeled out on a stretcher covered in white cloth. Her husband followed behind, sadly calling out his wife's name. The neighbor secretly asked the staff afterwards, and found out that the owner of the buffet restaurant had disappeared after a big fight with her husband the night before the incident. Her husband only discovered it in the morning when he came to the restaurant. His wife was found hanging in the kitchen, and the reason was that her husband had secretly gambled away their hard-earned money. Hearing these things made me no longer afraid, and until I left this restaurant, strange things never happened again. Although it's been so long since the incident, I believe she's still here in this restaurant, seems to still be persevering to make money.